All right, it's 1:30 p.m., which means we are now live on YouTube. Welcome to the live stream for episode number 249 of the Chillinois podcast. If you're listening on Spotify, SoundCloud, Apple Podcasts, TuneIn Radio, or wherever you listen to the Chillinois podcast, you heard that right. We've been premiering new episodes live on YouTube every Sunday. So, if you don't follow us on YouTube yet, what the hell are you doing? Follow us on YouTube, subscribe to us on YouTube. The easiest way to get there is by going to chillinois.net/YouTube, or you can go to youtube.com/c/Chillinois State. In this episode, we're going to be talking about a piece of legislation that was recently introduced to the 103rd General Assembly of Illinois. The bill that we'll be discussing today is House Bill 1, otherwise known as the Cure Act. I recently posted about this bill on social media because from what I understand, if it became law, this would effectively deschedule psilocybin and it would create a regulatory structure for the supported adult use of psilocybin. What does this mean? Well, good news, you tuned into the perfect episode because today I'm joined by Nathan Gates from the Illinois Psychedelic Society, and he will be answering my questions about the bill. We've also gathered questions from the community, and so I will be asking those questions on behalf of the community in today's episode. Thank you to all members of the community who submitted questions for today's episode, and this won't be the last time we talk about this bill, so if you'd like to submit more questions to us about the bill, you can go to chillinois.net/contact, or you can follow us on social media and send us your questions from there. So, had to make sure my joint was still lit. In case you didn't know, we release all of our new content exclusively at patreon.com/Chillinois. After this episode, if you'd like to watch more of our show, you can stream our newest episodes on patreon.com/Chillinois. We recently released an episode with Grant Smith Ellis. During the episode, we talk about an investigation into Curaleaf. In case you hadn't heard, there have been several allegations regarding the company Curaleaf. Now, Curaleaf is licensed to sell cannabis in the state of Illinois and several other states. And Curaleaf is arguably the largest cannabis company in the United States, which is what makes this episode so interesting. There have been explosive allegations regarding their alleged ties to Russia, secret use of an irradiation machine, and more. So you can listen to this episode right now, absolutely free, at chillinois.net/Patreon or patreon.com/Chillinois. Whatever works, both links are going to get you to our Patreon page. Once again, that's episode number 250 of our podcast featuring Grant Smith Ellis. So, I just said the word irradiation, which is a form of remediation, and if you're not sure what either of those words mean, we recently sat down with Carly Bader in episode number 252 of the Chillinois podcast. During the episode, we tell you about remediation, what it is, and we tell you about several different forms of remediation. Hint, irradiation is one of them. So my last announcement before I send you into today's episode with Nathan Gates is that I am especially excited to announce today that we dropped a new episode featuring defense attorney Evan Bruno. Longtime listeners of the show will recognize Evan as he has appeared on the show several times. I am particularly excited to announce his return to the podcast because of the exciting announcement he makes during the show. I'll give you a hint. It's an issue that could cause cannabis users like you and I to be locked away in prison for simple possession of cannabis. Today, yes, you heard that right. In a state where cannabis is apparently legal, we are still locking people up for simple possession of cannabis, which begs the question, is cannabis really legal in the state of Illinois? Well, I think that a defense attorney in the state of Illinois is the best person to talk about that with, because once again, he's still having to defend individuals like yourself and myself in the court of law for simple things like possession of cannabis. So definitely tune into that episode with Evan Bruno. It's episode number 253. And once again, it's available for streaming right now on patreon.com/Chillinois. Looks like it's about 1:35. So I think it's about time we got this show started. Are you ready to learn about what the Cure Act could mean for the state of Illinois? I'm pretty excited because I happen to be a pretty big fan of psilocybin. So at a glance, this sounds nice. But let's dive deep and learn what this actually means and what this actually could look like. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode, and I hope that you enjoy my conversation with Nathan Gates from the Illinois Psychedelic Society.
Take a turn right now to Springfield. A new bill would legalize psychedelic therapy in Illinois. Today we take a deeper look into the therapy that uses psilocybin, the active ingredient in magic mushrooms. And this would treat a variety of traumas, including PTSD. But if this bill passes, don't expect it to be like cannabis. You wouldn't just go to a store to pick up mushrooms. Health and wellness reporter Lauren Petty takes a closer look at this proposal.
Mushrooms changed Ajuni Sethi's life.
Psychedelics came into my life at a time when I was feeling pretty hopeless.
Originally from Palatine, Sethi used psychedelic therapy to overcome sexual trauma she had experienced as a child.
What psychedelics do is they offer a non-ordinary experience because our ego is just trying to push that information down.
Ajuni had to travel out of state to use mushrooms with a trained therapist, but a new bill in Springfield would change that.
Illinois has an opportunity to be a leader in the Midwest for this kind of facilitated use of psychedelics, and the demand is here. The research is out there.
The bill is called the Cure Act. CURE stands for Compassionate Use and Research of Entheogens.
All of these substances induce this kind of mystical experience or altered state of consciousness.
After being approached by doctors, veterans battling PTSD, and other researchers, Representative LaShawn Ford sponsored the bill that treats psychedelics different than cannabis.
That's very important, that there will be no retail sales, that you can't take it home to use, that you have to stay in a healthcare setting.
The Cure Act would create an advisory board that would come up with the rules and regulations that clinics like this one would have to follow.
We know that the science is there.
Dr. Rachel Norris runs Imagine Healthcare, a ketamine-focused clinic on West Grand, but she's interested in expanding to psychedelics if it becomes legal.
It's frustrating for me as a provider not to be able to provide something that I know based on the scientific research and tons of anecdotal evidence too from people that have been using it on their own for years, that this works.
It's a tool that we know works for people who have intense trauma, have complex trauma. So why would it not be available just like other pharmaceuticals are?
Lauren Petty, NBC5 News.
We're headed into a new legislative session. We're going to be seeing Illinois' 103rd General Assembly. If you follow us on social media, you may have recently seen that we shared that House Bill 1 for the 103rd General Assembly, which we will display on our screen shortly, and we'll have a link to in the podcast description, is known as the Illinois Cure Act. Among other things, I understand it to deschedule psilocybin and legalize a supported adult use model. But that's what I understand at a glance. Today, I am joined by Nathan Gates, who's going to fill us in on what exactly this is going to look like, what this means. So Nathan, thank you so much for joining me today on the Chillinois podcast.
Yeah, my pleasure. Glad to be here.
Yeah, and so before we get into it, please, can you tell my audience a little bit about yourself, what you do, what you love, anything?
Well, in short, I guess I'm a licensed counselor in private practice in West Central Illinois. I have an office in Canton. And I I've been here for a decade, just about a little bit more. I'm also a regenerative cattle farmer. We've got on our family farm, we've got a herd of cattle, and do that as well. In this capacity here today, I'm the president of the board of the Illinois Psychedelic Society, which you can find us online or on Facebook, the Illinois Psychedelic Society, if you're interested, and go ahead and join. And so it's in that capacity I'll be talking about this particular law today. We have been working, some of us in the Illinois Psychedelic Society and many others, on developing this bill that is sponsored by Rep. LaShawn Ford, that we're pretty excited about, House Bill 1.
Absolutely. So I'm about to share on my screen House Bill 1. You mentioned Illinois Psychedelic Society.org. We'll throw that in the podcast description as well, folks. So for folks that are watching, if you're not watching, it's chillinois.net/video. Here's the website for Illinois Psychedelic Society. But here is House Bill 1. The short description is Illinois Cure Act. Like you said, the House sponsor is LaShawn Ford, Representative LaShawn Ford. So yeah, I gave what I thought was a quick synopsis. I guess we can just start with, was I accurate? And if not, please correct me on the descheduling and the legalizing idea. I guess that's maybe a good place to start. I feel like that's what most people can understand right off the bat about this.
Yeah, we can walk through kind of what it does, but also sort of some of the thinking behind it as well. Because it's been the product of a lot of work, a lot of discussions, a lot of thought that's been happening here in Illinois, but also part of the larger conversation nationally. I mean, this has been debated obviously in Oregon and Colorado, where they have passed bills that do some of the same things. There's some differences, as well as all over the country. Thinking about how we can change from a relatively insane prohibitionist paradigm to something that makes a lot more sense. Basically, like you said, I think there's two main components. One is that it deschedules psilocybin from, it removes it from the list of controlled substances in the state of Illinois, which that effectively decriminalizes it, meaning there aren't criminal penalties associated with growing it, using it, possessing it. It won't be legal for sale. But it will be, criminal penalties will be removed for those other things. So that's one component of it. And the other is it sets up this, what some places call a supervised use program, which is a kind of a license and regulatory regime that will kind of, it creates an advisory board that will also be able to review other substances other than psilocybin to see if they would be appropriate fits for the program as well. Sets up what it would be the requirements to set up a psilocybin service center where people can go, where they can use on site with supervision, get the medicine there. So, but there's many things to regulate on that end. That'll be a highly regulated program. You'll have the growing of it will be regulated. Who can provide who can have a psilocybin service center, what the service providers, what requirements they'll be provided to have, what credentials they'll need. So all of that will be fleshed out in detail by the advisory board. So it creates that process that puts that into motion to create that supervised use program. It won't be limited to only people with psychiatric diagnoses. So you won't have to, have a diagnosed mental illness to use the program. So it won't be exclusively focused on mental health. That's the gist of it. That's the basics of it. We wanted a program that's going to be open and available for people. But it also is really important to us. And this is, I think, really speaking to from the perspective of membership at the Illinois Psychedelic Society. And I think people who are really coming at this from more of a grassroots level, the descheduling, the removing it from the list of controlled substances, the effective decriminalization of psilocybin is an extremely important part of the bill. And sort of, from my point of view, is what makes it work. Otherwise, you have a situation in which, it's a highly regulated program that will end up probably being somewhat very expensive because, there's going to be so many different, hurdles to cross and hoops to jump through, so to speak, to for people to be able to use the program that's going to end up being, at licensing and regulation and insurance. It'll be sort of expensive and inaccessible for a lot of people. It will be, accessible for some, but we wanted to make sure that, there's other ways of using psilocybin. There's other ways of, and those should be protected as well. And so that's where the decriminalization, removing from the list of controlled substances comes in. It allows for a more sort of grassroots and community-based, safe exploration of, how can we use these to benefit ourselves, each other, the community, without fear of imprisonment, basically.
Absolutely. And that's what this is all about. That's why I really love that part of the initiative. And I think that part of the initiative is crucial, the descheduling. Would I be correct in saying that no other state has gone that far?
Well, I don't know. It depends how you look at it. I mean, other states have decriminalized it, but removing it from the list of controlled substances, I think, is a unique, unique approach that Illinois that we're taking with this bill, is just to sort of remove it from that umbrella altogether. So I don't think that's been done. It's a very clean way to do it. Just sort of removes it from that body of regulation,
right,
without having to. Get really, in the weeds.
Make those graduated steps. Is that what you're kind of thinking of?
Yeah, it just takes it out from underneath that umbrella altogether, which is completely appropriate, I think, given given that it's a naturally occurring fungus,
right,
and is, I don't want to say completely safe because we can talk more about it. It's not that I'm saying, I wouldn't say that there are no risks associated with psychedelic use, but those risks are certainly not out of proportion with many, 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 many other sanctioned activities that people engage in all the time, that are not subject to regulation and imprisonment. So it's well in line with many other just well-established, commonly done activities, and it doesn't need to be regulated the way it is. And it does have, as we're seeing, there's decades of anecdotal stories, but then now we have increasing amounts of research indicating the potential, the benefits of this, not potential, but the shown demonstrated benefits that this can have for people, for their outlook, for their perspective on things, mental health. It can be a very helpful experience when, when done in a proper setting. And when I say that, I have to be careful when done in a proper setting, because I think when we say that, it sort of lends itself to being like, oh, a proper setting is that which is defined by the state or by researchers or by whoever. And I don't think that is a fair statement. I don't agree with that statement. Like, I do think there are settings that are better and worse, right? But I don't know that we know exactly what those are. And I don't think that right now taking a top-down approach to what that is a good idea. I think we can co-create those settings. We can co-create how we hold these experiences and how people can learn from them. So I think that's why the removing it from the list of controlled substances really allows for religious use, spiritual use to be done safely, community-based use. So I think it allows us to discover discover and co-create the best, most humane containers for use.
Yeah. I feel like the community use, the idea of community use is going to go a long way, like you said, towards access in the case that maybe the licensed option is not an option for some people. And so let's be clear on that. I don't want to lead people astray on it. As you mentioned earlier, the descheduling removes criminal penalties for possession, use, and cultivation. It doesn't allow you to sell to each other, right?
Correct.
So it wouldn't be that you would have a community gathering where you would go and purchase mushrooms. It would be that perhaps, let's just say hypothetically, you bring your own mushrooms and you can, do that as a community or religiously, as you said.
Yeah, and I think sharing them is something that would be allowed too. Like if you were to share with somebody.
Right. I think I read that. So that is something that's part of, I guess, this of descheduling.
Yeah, if it's removed from the list of controlled substances, there's no prohibition on giving it to someone.
Awesome. Well, that's legit. Well, before we jump into the supervised use program, I feel like we've kind of I don't want to transition just yet, but what else do you think is maybe key to mention about this part of the initiative? Anything we haven't touched on yet?
Specifically the descheduling, or just in general?
Yeah, just the descheduling part before we segue to the other major part of this initiative.
I think that's the gist of it, is just the removing of criminal penalties, and you won't be able to go buy it at the corner store. It won't be able to be sold except at registered licensed service centers, in which it'll also be required to be used on site in those places. So it won't set up a program where, like I said, where you just go buy it at the store or not even at the dispensary.
Right.
You won't be able to be in that setting. So it does not do that, but it does, allow for growing and sharing and using the substance, which again makes room for community use, for religious use, for people to use them the way many people already do, just with an extra security of knowing, you're not going to be in legal trouble for doing so.
Awesome. Yeah. And I feel like that's what it's all about. I don't mean to bring up the CRTA, the Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act, but I'm going to briefly. I feel like that's one of the things that we did wrong in retrospect, is that we didn't deschedule cannabis. There are still many criminal penalties that remain for cannabis to this day. And so unless you have anything
it sets up an environment that is, right now, under prohibition, you have cartels that are, drug gangs, cartels that control the supply. Under a highly regulated regime, you still have cartels, more or less, right, who benefit from state repression of competition. And we don't want that. We don't want to set up a place where you have, privileged, where it all has to funnel through this highly regulated system.
Yeah, because if I could add to that, somebody made this point recently, and I just thought it was brilliant. It's as if we're talking out of both sides of our mouth. On one side of the mouth, we're saying, yes, this is great, this is legal, nobody should be in jail for it. But on the other side of our mouth, we're saying only these select groups can grow it and sell it and blah blah blah. Right? And I'm talking about cannabis right now. So
it's not dangerous, but it's so dangerous that
Right.
only these people can do it, right? Like, it's not dangerous at all, but it is so completely dangerous. It is nonsensical. I think we would like to avoid that, and that's the reason making it taking off the schedule of controlled substances is so important. And I think it's one that people who are coming at this from a more grassroots point of view, who aren't necessarily interested, because a lot of proponents of this bill aren't necessarily interested in the supervised use, or mental health benefits. They're maybe interested in it for spiritual benefits, or because it's fun and they enjoy it, so they go safely to a concert and have a good time, or they like to sit around a campfire with friends, or whatever. And this wouldn't do anything for someone like that if it were to be just a bill about creating supervised use, and it didn't include anything about descheduling it. So I think the bill, to me, doesn't work without descheduling psilocybin, without the decriminalization element. That's, from our point of view at the Illinois Psychedelic Society, that's a vital component. It also, I think, helps with people who, at the universities who might be researching it, being able to remove any red tape that we can possibly remove, any legal red tape that can be removed, to make that easier to do, would be beneficial.
Very well said. Very well said. Like I said, I think this approach is done right, and I have to agree with my delay was because I was filling up my water here. I have to agree with what you said, that, and I was going to say it myself. I'm glad you led with it. This bill is, I mean, the foundation of this bill for me is the descheduling, and the fact that it removes criminal penalties for possession of any amount of psilocybin, the use and the cultivation. That is just, like you say, without that, I can't find myself supporting this. And many other people have said it. I don't mean to keep bringing up cannabis, but there are similarities. Home grow is a necessary check, and so the fact that, like I said, that we've done descheduling, or that we've proposed that, is huge for me. So
I'm not interested in a completely corporatized psychedelics, or a completely one where it's only seen as medicine and only available via a medical or therapeutic route. I'm not interested in that. And I'm a therapist, and I have a podcast myself, Altered States of Context, where we talk about therapeutic use. We talk about psychedelics and how they can be beneficial from a therapeutic point of view. And we haven't even touched on that part of the bill yet, but it's because I think that part of the bill builds on, like what you're saying, it builds on the foundation of justice, and it builds on the foundation of freedom. And justice and freedom are what descheduling psilocybin is about. Otherwise, you end up empowering and giving control to just different people. And I'm personally, and and as I'm speaking for the Illinois Psychedelic Society here, our membership isn't interested in doing that. We're interested in building something. I think that the supervised use, which we'll talk about in a minute, I think it can benefit a lot of people, and I'm very excited about it. I think that part of the bill is really exciting. I am for that. Like I said, that's what Brian Pilecki is, my podcast partner, and when we talk about, he's doing research with MDMA right now out in Portland, and we're both extremely bullish on how this can help people. I think it's fantastic, but again, if it's in a context in which there isn't freedom and justice, well, I'm just not interested in that. That to me is, it's a non-starter.
Well, people that listen to this show a lot know why that's so important to me. I'll just say, for folks that don't listen to the show and maybe are tuning in for the first time, I wholeheartedly agree. So, well, hey, if there's nothing else to say on descheduling, let's talk about supported, or as you mentioned, or you said earlier, supervised use program. Is that the right way to describe it?
I think it's sure. There's a lot. It's funny. I don't think we've fully settled on. I mean, as a overall, as a country going through this big process of change with how we're relating to psychedelics. I don't think we've settled on one particular terminology about that. Is it guided?
Sure.
Is it
Fair enough.
supervised? I mean, I think supervised use seems to be what people are saying, but the general idea there is it's a space that's, it's set up for a person to come take the substance and be held by credentialed people, not necessarily therapists, guides. By supervisors of some sort,
Sure.
who are credentialed to be there to keep people safe throughout the experience. And that's essentially what the program would be set up as.
Yeah. The key here is that, we are allowing people to consume this in a fashion that's not alone. In other words, supported, supervised, however you want to say it. Which I think is a great option for folks that, are able to do that, So,
yeah, and I think there's a lot of reasons that people would do it, and it allows flexibility too. Like I think there would be able to be group use with this that would be supervised. People with different goals. Again, it won't be restricted to only people who are using it for use with a mental health diagnosis. It will be for anyone who feels sort of either stuck in their life or is looking for growth, or maybe they are struggling with some sort of depression that may be able to be helped. And the exact format, I think, will be taken under consideration by the advisory board, and that's going to be a long process, like it was in Oregon, like it will be in Colorado. I mean, I think we had the advantage of when looking at this bill, of kind of seeing what went well and what was hard in Oregon during their process of hammering out the details. In Colorado recently passed a law as well, but there will be a lot of details that will be finalized by the advisory board that aren't necessarily spelled out exactly in the bill. Questions of usually there'll be a couple, you'd meet with a facilitator a couple of times. And by a couple, I don't mean like two, I mean like some undecided amount before using. Then you'd have a session, and then there would be time after. What typically is called like integration. Integration roughly means you've had an experience of some sort, and then you make sense of it. Basically, you make sense of that with your, what that experience means, what you, what insights or experiences you had, and how that sort of changes your perspective, alters your perspective, what ideas, thoughts it gives you on your life, its meaning. So it's essentially a sense-making process afterwards. And again, that the amount of sessions isn't in stone either. It's
Sure.
that would be done by the advisory board, and there's rules about who is represented on the advisory board, how many people from what different settings. So there's all of that's in the bill, how that advisory board will be composed.
And I was just actually about to ask about that. Like, I just assume it's going to be health professionals that, I'm seeing it. Well, let me just share my screen. Maybe this answers my question, but maybe you can expound upon this. It establishes the Illinois Psilocybin Advisory Board within the Department of Health for the purpose of advising and making recommendations to the department regarding the provision of psilocybin services. What I was going to ask, that didn't answer my question. What I was going to ask is who, is on this board? What is the board going to look like?
I can't answer that completely. I don't remember exactly, but it's going to be representative of lots of different stakeholders. So not exclusively healthcare providers. There'll be representatives from, like, I think a religious perspective, and representatives from the perspective of cultivation, and a diverse community representation. I can't
Maybe
remember precisely exactly what board seats or advisory board seats are stipulated.
yeah.
But there was a real effort to make it a very large cross section with lots of perspectives, so that there wasn't a single perspective that was likely to dominate that board.
Awesome. Yeah. And maybe maybe if you can get more information about that, get back to me on it, just so I can get a better idea of what it looks like. One of my main thoughts is like I'm glad you said that it wouldn't only be, that's where I was headed. It's great when it's comprised of health professionals. Like, yes, I respect health professionals, but I like to hear that it sounds like the idea would be a diverse range of people. And I guess an idea I want to float, I don't know, maybe you can get back to me on your follow-up, just because, we had a medical cannabis advisory board, and it sounds like they're getting that thing back together, and they had health professionals on. But one of the things I thought that was interesting, they were able to incorporate a perspective they were able to incorporate is the advocate's perspective, which I feel like you've been speaking to with regard to descheduling. So I just wondered if like I say, if you follow up with me, what
Yeah, I'd
that
have to
looks
look.
like.
It's in the text of the bill. I'd have to look it
Cool.
up, and I probably ought to remember, but I don't remember every bit. But it's like I said a minute ago, I'm a licensed counselor and very interested in this from that perspective. But
Mhm.
I think not everyone working on the bill, is a in the broad health services field, and we really as a group feel that it's really important to that broader interests are represented than just the interests of. This isn't against healthcare. It's just saying that this is sort of, well, it's a big conversation. It's one we get into
Sure.
on Altered States of Context a lot, is because of the way psychedelics operate, and the way they create change, which is not entirely known and understood, um, and the sort of experiences they evoke. It's not fair to try to contain it within only an interpretation of health, with only an interpretation of medicine. Um, there is an often a religious or spiritual dimension that people experience. Um, there's also just a good old-fashioned fun time that can be experienced. There's challenging and difficult experiences too, but these
Well,
don't fit well in the rubric of medicine necessarily. So while I don't think it's not therapeutic, I don't think it's just an automatic fit for a therapeutic or medical paradigm. And I don't think that the professions of therapy and medicine, I absolutely don't think that they should have any sort of like stranglehold or monopoly over this at all. And I am in that group of people, and I don't think that our perspective should be uniquely privileged at all.
yeah. Yeah, and I might add, this will change hopefully with time, and if this bill were to pass, there is the added, I mean, it's just a fact. I know that psilocybin actually is, I think, more researched than cannabis, or at least I read that online. Whether or not that's true, supposedly we've got more research behind it, right? But I guess my point is,
Yeah, I think that's true, actually.
yeah, my point is, though, we don't have as much as we could if we would have been just treating this normally all along. And so it is important to not only limit it to, medical professionals, because their knowledge is limited, not because they're not bright people, but because the law limits them from studying it, right? So yeah.
Well, right, and it's a particular perspective, right? So when you're studying and doing research, that's just one way. It's a good way, but it's only one way of understanding, what's going on. You're being empirical. You're trying to use the tools of science to sort of understand conceptually what's happening. And look, there's just some stuff that we're not going to understand conceptually. I'm going to go ahead and say that, and I'll stand by that. Like, there's some stuff here, like I don't know how on message it is to talk about it, but it's like we're talking about some weird stuff. I mean, psychedelics are weird. And they don't just behave um like medicines as we would typically understand them. Um and so I think, there needs to be more room to uh, try to understand them in different ways that maybe aren't just like conceptually and empirically driven. Um, Interestingly, though, I'll add to that just a little background based on what you were saying. Um, these were being studied quite extensively throughout the 1950s and 60s. Um, psychiatry was pretty in on studying these, like many papers were written. They were being used in many different settings, and we got some very interesting research. Now all that research has shortcomings that a lot of people will be really quick to point out, and those shortcomings mostly relate to it being done at a time when research methods aren't the same as they are today. So sometimes they don't live up to the standards that we currently set. And there also are some just really inherent problems with studying psychedelics. Like, for instance, the gold standard for medicine is like a randomized controlled trial, right? Which is, which essentially means you have basically, a short version is you have two groups. One person's given the medicine, the other person's given the placebo, and neither participant or the researcher knows who got what, and so you get either basically the active dose or sugar pill or some comparable thing, some placebo that's there's active placebos that people use with psychedelics sometimes that do something, but they're not the drug in question. They kind of do something to make, but the problem with the is if you got psilocybin or not. If you got the blind, and so does the researcher. Like, the blinding can't be completed. It unblind, the study is always going to be unblinded, because wow, did I take a sugar pill or did I take a whole bunch of psilocybin? Well, it's pretty obvious within about an hour and a half. So that's just something that's not a problem with psilocybin at all. That's just a problem with our research methods that we use to evaluate medicines. That's the gold standard, but it's one that doesn't necessarily make sense. It's not the only way it can be studied, and I think there's some creative researchers who are trying to get around that right now. But anyway, coming back, it's a lot of research was done prior to about 1967. 1967 was in California outlawed. LSD at the time was when was the more common psychedelic being used for research. Other ones were, but LSD by far was the largest. And there was good data with alcoholism and depression and many things. But again, it was all preliminary. You can't look back at it and say that there was anything conclusive, but it's a very interesting body of work. But then, starting in the late 60s, it kind of cat got out of the bag, so to speak. It got into popular culture, induced a moral panic combined with the hippies and the protest with the war, and and that moral panic led to that backlash that led to it being banned completely, which ended research. So then there was 30 years of nothing. We didn't learn anything, which is very sad. And it's really a remarkable, to me, it's a remarkable story about not just prohibition, but of scientific censorship, because you had a really like the kind of data that you'd be like, we need to follow up on this. Let's learn more. Let's continue to study this, and then nothing. And because you'd be risking jail, you'd be risking your career. And so not only was it people just stopped doing it, people stopped talking about it. I mean, it was just erased. And that's the censorship part, is not only did people stop studying it, but people stopped talking about it. You could go, and I did get a My undergraduate degree was in psychology. I graduated in 2000, and during that time, like you wouldn't hear about this in a psychology degree, but it was something that was remarkable. It was a remarkable. Well, at the time, it kind of appeared to be a blip, but it was a big blip. Um, and I remember because I've been interested for a long time, and I am who I am. So at the time, I did a couple papers on it that I turned in. I was like, man, did you know psychedelic therapy, psychedelic research, this is a thing? And so I did these papers in my psychology classes, and my teachers didn't roast me for it or anything, but they kind of rolled their eyes. I think it's like, this isn't the kind of thing we talk about anymore. It's like, well, I mean, that's kind of bullshit, but
It's crazy.
Yeah. So it was a really like an incredible program of legal repression and academic censorship that happened. And then it's really, I think in the last 20, but really, really accelerating in the last 10 years. There has that research prohibition has thawed, and now it's being done increasingly all over the place. And it's very exciting. It's I'm not going to give a huge summary of the research today, but we've got data with MDMA and depression. MDMA is not in this particular bill, although I believe, and oh man, this is something I'll have to check. If that's one that the advisory board is going to be tasked with reviewing or not, I don't know. But psilocybin for depression has been studied. There's not only is it being studied for treating specific conditions, but we're trying to in research settings figure out, like, well, what's going on? What's going on in the brain? What's going on in people's perceptions? Why is this seem to be impactful? What is it about this experience that is moving to people? What is it about this experience that seems to allow people to make changes? So I think, to me personally, that's much more interesting, is these sort of process questions of what it means to be a person and how it is to change, rather than sort of these trials of like, well, does this work or not for X? Because all those sorts of trials are basically built by pharmaceutical companies for pharmaceutical companies, in my opinion. There's a lot of interesting and useful ways to study it. That's one of the less interesting ways, but many would disagree, and that's fine. I want to know how it works. That's what I want to know. I want to know how it works. I want to know what those, how we can best support it having the kind of effects that we want it to have, right? Like how we can best support people who want to have an experience and come out of that experience on the other side, more able to live the life that they want to live, align with their values more tightly. This is what I want to understand how to do. And we're understanding that more all the time. And I think that's happening in research settings, but it's also happening prolifically just among people who use. And I think that, again, coming back to, I want to bang the hell out of that drum. I said, I don't want to beat that dead horse, but it's all right. I'll beat it because I just think it's so important that people are able to kind of continue to learn from this. And learning isn't only going to happen, with people in white coats in scientific institutions.
And learning may not always be like it may be, we don't have to attribute characteristics to what we learn. We can simply learn. How about that? Right? Because let me just say, there's going to be some great experiences. Some people might have a bad trip, but that's all right. We can learn from that. And, one of the things you brought up earlier, for folks that aren't aware, setting is a huge deal. But as I don't know who coined the duopoly of these terms, but set and setting, so your mindset is a big thing that we have to take into account with this. And so, yeah, I just wanted to, you have any thoughts on that idea?
That set and setting, it comes from the great boogeyman himself, that's credited to Tim Leary. um, who was one of the researchers at Harvard, who extremely famously, took a hard turn into the counterculture, and kind of was a Johnny Appleseed of LSD. Um, it was called "The Most Dangerous Man in America" by Richard Nixon. Um, Really interesting and controversial figure. But I think set and setting is credited to him, which is an enduringly good idea. I always talk about context, and set and setting really is what that is. I mean, it's talking about the context for use, and your intention going into it. So the set is basically your mindset, your intention, what you bring into the experience internally, um, and then the setting is where you are, who you're with, what's going on, is there music playing, like all these things make up the setting, the environment you're in. So that's the context is tremendously important, and will shape what the experience is a very great deal. And so having I think a safe and supportive context is very important. I think that's very important regardless of what other trappings there are, whether it's medical or recreational or whatever. Set and setting or context is always important.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, frankly, like I said, I don't even necessarily like to attribute characteristics to trips. And we'll back out of this topic because I know we just kind of got deep into this like hypothetical topic. But I've had trips where the whole time I've felt absolutely amazing, the best I've ever felt in a long time. I've had some trips where you might describe them as unpleasant, but in retrospect, I have this realization why it was. It's because these thoughts that I had been shoving down for so long finally came to the forefront in my mind, and I had to confront them and deal with them. And that was unpleasant, but guess what? I had to deal with that. And so, while I might describe it as unpleasant, and while that might sound like a bad trip, I was able to apply lessons I learned from that session. I don't mean to say trip, whatever you want to say.
Trip's cool.
And
it's a trip. And I think we don't have to throw out that lingo. It's a pretty damn good term.
For sure. I just want to make sure for listeners so that they understand what I'm referring to as well. You get what I'm saying there, where it's like I don't necessarily like to attribute a characteristic to how a trip goes, though many people do. But even when you might say it went bad, I actually found a way to view it through a positive lens. It was a learning experience, So
for sure. And I think that's there can be challenging aspects, and part of that is exactly what you're describing. There's maybe unpleasant experiences that we'd rather not have, and ability to avoid that, I think, is reduced. And so you can kind of either go into it or experience a great deal of anxiety and pain trying to avoid it. Usually the only way out of those is through, if you go into it and you experience that, and there's a lot of power there, actually, learning acceptance and facing difficult emotions and things like that. I also want to throw out too that there are such things, as what I would call truly bad trips. And I don't, sometimes it's a popular saying, people will say like there's no such thing as a bad trip. It's just challenging experiences. And I would not myself go that far, because I think that there can be trips that are, especially if they're not in a good environment, like if you're in an unsafe environment, or you're with people who are not trustworthy, who are can take advantage of you, try to influence you in undue ways. I do think that there are risks there. And so there are such things as bad trips that are just bad, that are just bummers. And so I think that, part of what I really care about with this is that there is good information, and that people are able to be in control of their own experience, right? Like you're not worried about, being arrested, because I'm saying, like, I imagine I've never had that experience. That's got to be a bad trip. Or if you want supervised use, that you can be there and you can know that you're in a safe setting, or you could be with friends, like that you trust, and that we have good information. The huge part of what we want to do at the Illinois Psychedelic Society, I mean, probably our core mission is to help provide good information and education to people, so they can understand what you can and what you cannot expect, because there are certain aspects that are going to be unpredictable, and how to be safe, and how to learn how to enjoy yourself, how to learn how to use substances in a way, use these substances in particular in a way that is what you want. And part of that, I think, is reducing exposure to bad trips. That doesn't mean avoiding difficult content, right? Like you're describing. I think that that's important. Part of it is challenging yourself, and part of it is learning to go into difficult places. But I also think trying to help people avoid bad trips is good, because they can be a real bummer. That's just the truth.
That's putting it lightly. It can be a real bummer.
That is putting it lightly.
Yeah. Well, we'll start to wrap up here soon. I want to get to community questions. I do have one more question on the advisory board. That's what we were talking about before we went on that tangent. So you kind of actually already answered this question, but maybe give me more on this. What power do they have? It sounds like they can decide on other substances, and maybe we can get a fact sheet to include in the podcast description on that. But what's vested to them?
Yeah, they'll be able to say what a facilitator is, like how that person must be trained. How does a center become licensed? Who gets a license? Who can, and can't, access services, things like that. And then it would review other substances to see if they fit within the program. So beyond, psilocybin, it'd be able to recommend other substances that would fit within sort of the model that it would adopt. So all of those details, I think dosing, how the mushrooms are grown. I don't know. I'm not saying they would be able to dictate exactly what doses could and couldn't be used, but maybe a limit. I'm not specifically certain. I think it has a lot of latitude to determine, based on the input of the advisory board members, sort of the parameters of of a lot of what the program can and can't do. I know that's a very vague answer, but part of it is that it's a process there is a good deal of discretion that's left to the advisory board. So that's why it's so important to have a good representative board that isn't just a rubber stamp for a particular perspective.
Yeah. Well, cool. That's all I have for that. I will just add, and I can definitely email you after the fact, but I definitely want to know more. And I know my audience is going to want to know more about this advisory board. I think chief on my mind is who will compromise it? What power will they have? And like with compromise, who will be, I don't mean to use the word compromise, who will fulfill the advisory board? The idea is, like you said, I love that I'm already hearing it wouldn't only be health professionals, but I think it would be key that, somebody like you or somebody from the Illinois Psychedelic Society, an advocate, is a part of this, because it sounds like this advisory board is like the foundation of this supervised use program, if we're going to call it that. Like you said, there's many different things we could call it, but this sounds like a big deal. And so I definitely want to get more info on that. So I'll follow up with you on that. I got a big picture question on this, and I'm sorry, it was on my mind, but it's actually one of the questions from the community. People are asking, and I'm wondering, what's your outlook on this? You're a lot closer to all this than I am. I know some of the people, I've met you and we've talked a few times, but like, from what you're hearing and what you've heard since it's been announced, what is your outlook on this? This is a big step. Do you really think this is, possible, going to be accepted? Thoughts?
A year ago, or just over a year ago, when we started working at it, I think my outlook was like, hey, we have an opportunity to create something, and we need to take it because it's an opportunity. But like, it felt like, long shot. I feel more optimistic, more bullish now than I did then. I think there have been a lot of things that have, fallen in place. I think Colorado passing their measure by popular vote was really important. Kind of demonstrated that, they're, um, people are open to this idea. Um, and I think that it just, the people um, I've talked to a lot of people who I wouldn't necessarily have expected a few years ago to be supportive, who I have found are range from interested and open to downright supportive. So I've been kind of consistently surprised by the openness that I've encountered on this, because I still sort of operate from like a 20-year ago mindset myself, even, where it's like, drug war and people are against this and freaking crazy hippies and all that stuff. But I think that people, are, increasingly convinced by a lot of evidence that this can be beneficial. I think people are increasingly convinced that the drug war is a boondoggle that is terrible for people, and anything we can do to chip away at it is a good thing. The repression doesn't work. That often makes the problem worse. So I think there's a lot of appetite for reform on that front. And I'm cautiously optimistic. I'm not saying I think it's a slam dunk. I'm very interested to see what happens when various, I think the different thing about the Illinois bill, as opposed to obviously Colorado or Oregon, is that this is a legislative bill as opposed to a ballot initiative. So in those, they run the ballot initiative and people vote, and the politicians don't have a single word to say about it. I mean, they can say whatever they want, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter. Like, the people vote on it or they don't. Now there's advantages and disadvantages. One of the disadvantages you've seen is that the language of the bill, the language of the ballot initiative, is what it is. So if you have that and then you run into a problem, there's no flexibility. You can't like really work with it very easily, because the law, the people spoke, and that's the words they said. And so if there's something that, oh man, this doesn't really make sense, doesn't matter. Whereas with the legislative approach, you can be more flexible. You can adapt more to the needs of reality. But on the other side, that means you're dealing with interest groups a lot more. And so I'm curious to see what kind of organized resistance, if any, surfaces. I can't believe there wouldn't be any. But that's, I think, what I'm interested to see now. I'm interested to see how some of the big mental health professional organizations react. I'm curious to see. I mean, I hope that we'll see this as an increase in options for people, as an increase in freedom, as a carefully supervised program, and on the one hand, and on the other hand, an increase in freedom and a decrease in repression. So I hope that colleagues in my profession, the big professional orgs, would see that for what it is, and not see it as infringing on their turf, which I think big organizations are inclined to view things as. So I'm gonna just hope they don't see it that way, and hope they have a bigger perspective than that. So I think there's a lot of things to wonder about. There's a lot of questions, but it's there. It's House Bill 1. It's in the House now. So I think we're going to start seeing that, and I'm hopeful.
Hell yeah. Me too. I think that this bill sounds worthy of my support. I definitely, like I said, definitely got to hear more about the advisory board. But well, cool. You ready to transition to community questions?
Sure.
To wrap up the show? Cool. Perfect. Let me just start with the ones I got on Instagram. Thank you for the folks that submitted questions. We really appreciate it. Let's start with the some of these we may have already answered. How about we start with the bottom left? This is something that I feel like we understand it, or we already answered. Take this on in a bottle.
Yeah, pretty much what I said. I mean, I'd say it's closer to legalizing, although still with the restriction of sales to licensed licensed service centers. So like I think a full on legalization would be would include direct sales, but this is, I think, close to that.
Yeah.
I think it's closer. I think it's closer to legalizing than decriminalizing myself. But those are kind of vague words, actually. And
Right.
so those are, and that's part of why we opted with the language we did, rather than legalizing or decriminalizing, because those, like, removing it from the schedule of controlled substances is a specific action that it does. It's that it removes it from that. It would still be able to be regulated for sale, because commerce can be regulated in that way, but it wouldn't be able to be regulated like you can have a mushroom, you can grow mushrooms,
Mm-hmm.
you can give a mushroom to somebody because it's not a controlled substance.
Hell yeah. I think we actually already answered most of these questions except for maybe this one. Take this one on here in the top right hand corner. If you can, read it for our listening audience.
Is this going to follow the same model cannabis does? If so, I'm not sure how great it is. It is not, I think, in the way that we've detailed it. We've learned from it. I mean, there's a couple things that are similar. It's not 100% opposite in every way, but I think there's a lot of differences. And even if we were to be like, this cannabis model is great, which we're not, but even if we were to be, it's such a different substance. Like the cannabis is highly desirable from a profit point of view because people buy a lot of it, right? Like if someone likes to smoke pot, man, they're going to buy a lot of pot over the course of a year, right? If someone is a mushroom enthusiast, they're not that likely to buy that much. You don't use it nearly the amount. So fewer people use it, and the people who do use it use a lot less. So the sales are never going to be, even in a totally open environment, you totally sell however much you want, it would never be nearly the market size that cannabis would be, even remotely close. So it's just never going to make it's just going to have to follow a different model anyway. And even if it could follow the same model, we wouldn't want it to follow the cannabis model. So there's a lot of actual differences and definite differences in the approach that we're trying to take.
Awesome. And then the last question from Instagram.
Do you expect regulations to allow access to licensing for small farmers? Well,
it's kind of hard to answer at this point, right? You said the advisory board is going to flesh what licensing means and all that stuff. I don't mean to hijack your answer.
No,
but is that...
it's right. It is hard to answer. This is why, again, we wanted to make sure descheduling wasn't involved. That doesn't help people who are farming because you won't be able to sell it.
Sure.
Illinois, where we live, loves regulation, and I'm afraid I want it to be like, and I don't see any reason why it shouldn't be. Personally, of course, it should be like small growers. That would be great. I would be concerned that it would be so regulated that it would just be bigger growers. I'm a little afraid that that's how it would end up. I'm just being honest about that. Hopefully there's a way we can mitigate that, but the best way to mitigate that is to let those concerns be known, to be active about it. Ask, people, contact representatives about the bill, like learn more about it, become involved in this process. There'll be town halls that you'll be able to attend. And if you follow the Illinois Psychedelic Society, we'll tell you different ways you can get involved and let people know that, hey, we're really interested in allowing small growers and making sure that there's space for more craft growers, that it isn't just huge, because unlike cannabis, which I guess I don't know that much about growing cannabis, it's pretty fussy from what I understand. Growing psilocybin mushrooms is not fussy, and it doesn't need, I'm sure cannabis doesn't need all the rigmarole it's required to have either, but I just don't know anything about it really. But it could be, there's no reason that inherently it couldn't be done by small growers really effectively and really safely. So I hope, but I think that's something to get involved with, because I think the default here in Illinois often is centralized regulation, centralized power. So we've done what we can in the way the bill is composed. But yeah, it's just going to be interested people who are sort of involved and supportive, who can kind of help keep the power distributed widely.
Yeah. And if I can help with, like, I'll definitely keep my eyes on Illinois Psychedelic Society.org. We'll have that in the description, folks, for town halls and stuff. But if there's any way I can help amplify that, I'd love to. So
Great.
Well, let's shoot through the rest of the questions and close out. So I posted this on Reddit. I actually posted it on Illinois Trees, which is a cannabis company, or cannabis company, a cannabis subreddit. So it's a community. That's the word I was looking for. And it's one of the largest in the state of Illinois, 30,000 subscribers. And so I posted this earlier today. I helped to moderate. So I basically said, speaking with Illinois Psychedelic Society today, what questions do you have? This is kind of funny. The top comment is addressing something I said, because sometimes people complain when, for example, a user would post cannabis from Michigan. They'll say, hey, this is Illinois Trees, not Michigan Trees, right? And so I said, in before, this is Illinois Trees, not Illinois Mushrooms. I promise I don't plan to post about this henceforth, but since there's a lot of interest, I wanted to give you all an opportunity to submit questions, because when I shared the news, a lot of people on this forum seemed very interested. And this top comment is somebody saying, I can only speak for myself, but I'd be interested to see how this unfolds. So in the cannabis community.
In cannabis, I'm no news to your listeners, I'm sure. I mean, it can be, at higher doses, quite a psychedelic substance for sure.
Sorry, I didn't realize I was muted. Lost my screen there for a second. Was just going to share with you again here, and we'll finalize these questions. Didn't mean to share my Instagram, but there's one question on there when we get through the Reddit questions. So this is something we haven't touched on. Hopefully this bill works, because I'm affected by the BS this state allows. I got caught with 0.3 of shrooms. We haven't talked about expungements yet.
Yeah, that's
isn't that a part of this?
Yeah, that's in there. That's in there for crimes related to psilocybin.
Gotcha. What can you tell me about that? Like, is it expungement of everything, or amnesty, or like what is?
I ought to know better than I do. So I've told you what I can recall from that portion. Sorry.
Cool. No worries. That's something else I can follow up with you on expungement as well.
And we can follow up with Gene. Gene Lacey is the director of the Illinois Psychedelic Society, and has been the person. Just unbelievable energy. She's done unbelievable work, and I'm sure she can answer just every question off the top of her head. So yeah, she's been amazing, continues to be amazing about all of this.
Oh yeah, shout out to Jean. We'll have to get her back on the show again. Okay, so we already addressed this, basics of home cultivation. Is it going to be legal? It's not going to be criminal. So yes, you can do it, right? What are the grow rules? I'm not getting the sense that there are any, really.
Not for home use. If it's descheduled, I mean, you want a PF tech, you want to do sawdust, you want to make it whatever.
Yeah. Are they planning to set up a medical card? You address this. No, you don't have to have a medical diagnosis. You can, if you're just having a hard time, or if you just want to have a fun time, you can have mushrooms, or anything else the advisory board approves. Will there be shops? Sounds like there's going to be a legal option to procure psilocybin, but it's not the same as a dispensary, right? You don't just buy and leave.
No, you don't buy and leave. You would be able to stay and take it on site, or it can be taken off site. It could be used with facilitated use. Like it can be petitioned that you could, like, for instance, people who have a hard time leaving their homes for reasons, like they could have, that would there would be a process for that, but it wouldn't be just grab and go.
Yeah. What's a realistic timeline? I mean, it's got to, if this bill wants to pass, it's got to be in this session, which is through when?
2 years. It could be
2
two.
years.
It could be up to 2 years during this legislative session. It might not take that. I don't really know how to, like, it would have to be within 2 years, but it doesn't have to be that long.
Yeah.
But that's the, there'll be that time, there'll be debate, there'll be finagling, there'll be all that. But it would have to pass within 2 years in this session for it to pass.
Yeah. Looks like we've addressed basically all the questions. Here's a question that I basically stole. What are the chances of it passing? While the majority of people are fine with legal cannabis, I don't know that the same is true for shrooms, although support is growing around the country, as you mentioned earlier.
2 states have voted for it. The only 2 that's been on the ballot have won.
Yeah. I don't want to give too much airtime to this, but somebody asked, how about we fix the totally broken weed laws in the state before moving to shrooms? I said, honest question. Why don't we do both?
Why not both?
I can give you my own speculation, but we'll keep that for another episode, as to why maybe you might not see any progress in Illinois cannabis, but we'll keep my speculation to another episode.
It probably has just everything to do with cash, would be my uneducated guess.
Dollar bills, y'all. Yep. You're right on it. You're right.
That's most problems, if you really look at it, that boils down to that.
Yeah. Okay. Well, hey, I think we've only got one more question. And I think we already addressed it as well. Two more questions actually, and we've addressed them both, but just, so that people see their questions read on air. True Social Equity in Cannabis asked, will people who sell psilocybin be penalized or criminalized, they meant to say, in any way? Question. We've kind of
no caramelization of criminals will be tolerated.
But yeah, what I guess we didn't ask about that. You said no selling. What does happen if I tried to sell you shrooms? Hypothetically,
I'm gonna say I don't know.
Okay, cool. It'd be interesting to know the answer to that question, just hypothetically. I don't know. But anyways, looks like we already answered this other question, which is, how is the program going to affect people in severe critical conditions that might not be able to afford the treatment? Is the clinical program suited for Susie and Brian with the nice wallet size? You kind of addressed this multiple times, but take a whack at it if you could.
Yeah, I think that the supervised program. Now I think that there's room. Hopefully, we can, find ways to innovate with group sizes and things like that to make it as affordable as possible with people. But it's always going to be, look, supervised use is always going to be kind of expensive because you're going to be paying licensed professionals.
Yeah, you got to pay a supervisor
for time,
Yeah.
And it's a lot of time, and I think most supervised use programs require, which I support, before and after care, right? And that takes people's time that have to be paid. So there's always going to be, a pretty substantial cost associated with it. Hopefully the advisory board can not make it harder than it needs to be, not make more regulations than it needs to make, right? Because every bit of red tape you add, it just adds to the cost. But would need you need to make sure, you don't just have, fly by night people, without an advisory board, without an ethical board, without, standards, who were just saying like, hey, come, trip here in my basement. And I think that we want people to be able to know they are, if they're going to want this service, they want, certain minimum standards of safety to for sure be met. So it's a matter of finding what are these standards that are, that we feel are important without going over the moon about it, and creating standards just make it really expensive. So that's going to have to be negotiated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think, to close on the idea of supported adult use, there's a form of I would argue, support adult use. It's highly normalized in our society today.
Yeah.
Bars. You probably knew where I was going with that.
I was going to say friends, but go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, sure. But what I mean to say is, I'm not saying every bartender is great about it. Obviously, bartenders get in trouble letting, over serving or whatever. But the idea is that the bartender has a legal obligation to like keep their customers in check.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm acknowledging that doesn't always happen, but let's move on from that. It's really normalized and accepted. And, if you took one shot and immediately fell on the ground, they'd be like, oh, ho, buddy, we're not going to, no matter what, we're not going to give you more drinks tonight. Right.
Yeah. And
that's accepted, maybe not by you on that night, but it's accepted as that's the bartender's role. And so I don't know. I wanted to mention that because sometimes people get weird about the idea of, or they don't understand the idea of public consumption. And I'm like, it's right in front of you almost every day. Beer is offered at basically any restaurant. So,
yeah. And so this would be, somewhere between a bar and a clinic. I don't know exactly.
Right. We should be clear. I don't mean to say that this would be like that. I was just trying to say like a more familiar version of public consumption is a bar. So,
yeah.
Anyways.
And that's, so that has to be, hashed out exactly what that looks like. But, and then there's also, again, it would not be, a crime to grow it, consume it, share it, possess it. So, in that case, that does open up the opportunity for other, for community use and for finding other, ways of using that can be safely done without some of the expense. And there are going to be times when people want that. There's going to be times when I think it could be really beneficial. Like if somebody has, like some significant, psychological difficulty and they want a good before and after care and want to be really focused and use it like as treatment, that's going to be supervised use is going to be better for that than just go like with a friend or whatever. But for a lot of people that's going to be, as today, right now, currently, tonight, all over Illinois is already what people are doing. They just do that more safely. So there will be options. I mean, the idea is to try to have a lot of different options for people, but with the supervised use, there is going to be cost in front associated with creating a program that is like safe and beneficial.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your candor on that one. I've got one last question, and then I want to give you the last word to plug your podcast, website, whatever you want. So what would it look like, just hypothetically, if descheduling got removed from this bill? Would you say the Illinois Psychedelic Society, hypothetically, would no longer support this bill if descheduling got removed? Because again, it's like a big part.
Yeah, I wouldn't. I've been in everything that I've done with this so far. I'm like, oh, if we can't. I mean, I haven't been attached to descheduling because actually that wasn't even on my radar at first. It was more decriminalizing it, right?
Right.
And so, I guess if the details of that were changed and how it was accomplished, as long as there was still a robust decriminalization element, I would support it. But if there wasn't, I wouldn't. I can't speak completely for society. I think we'd want to know what our members thought. I am guessing that there would be a drastic drop in support for the bill among members if that were to be removed. And like I said, I personally, if it were to be completely removed, I couldn't support a bill that didn't include that.
Good deal. Yeah, I agree with you. I just don't want to be in a situation where we're talking out of both sides of our mouth, like with cannabis, right? So, okay, cool. Well, I promised you the last word. You mentioned Altered State of Context podcast. Did I say that right?
Yeah, Altered States of Context. It's Dr. Brian Pilecki and I do that. It's wherever you listen to podcasts. We don't have video. It's not on YouTube, but it's on all the podcast platforms. And we talk, either do episodes, just he and I are talking about a specific issue, pertinent to psychedelics. Specifically, it's a little more on the clinical use, although not exclusively. Sometimes we go into other areas. We've talked to people about religious use and spiritual use and recreation, broader conversations about the drug war and some social equity and whatnot. And we tend to interview people in the field, either in psychedelic medicine or people who are more associated with the field of psychology, who are also interested in psychedelic medicine. So that's the podcast. I write a Substack newsletter, Tripping with Nate, at substack.com. That's somewhere you can follow me, or if you use Twitter, at Tornado Nate is my Twitter handle. I'm too prolific on that platform. But that's fun. I have fun on Twitter. So Tornado Nate, at Tornado Nate is where to find me there. And those are basically the places I would say to find me if you're interested.
Cool. Well, folks, if you're listening and you want to connect, there's a link in the podcast description. If you click on that link, it'll have all the links we mentioned today, including a link to the website, Illinois Psychedelic Society. I'll try to find some links to Altered States of Context. We'll have a link to the full bill, your social media handles.
Yeah, I can send that to you. And I would say, too, if you have listened to this podcast and you've made it to the end, you should just definitely join the Illinois Psychedelic Society, because you're clearly interested. So just go onto Facebook or onto the Illinois Psychedelic Society.com and join the Illinois Psychedelic Society.
Hell yeah. I think that's a good place to end. Well, folks, I hope you found value in this episode of the Chillinois podcast. If you have any questions, you can go to chillinois.net/contact, send them my way, and I can get connected with Nate or folks at the Illinois Psychedelic Society to do this again. I'm sure we'll be talking more in the future as this progresses. So I look forward to continuing to speak with you, dude. I appreciate your time today.
Yeah, thanks. It was fun.
All right. We'll see you next time.